Well, I think I'm just going to start. I thought someone was going to say something. But hello, everyone, and welcome to Automotive EV. My name is Natalie Sauber. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's session is all about the current and changing trends towards future cities and sustainability. I'm therefore delighted to be joined today by Frederic John from Neckermann Strategic Advisors, Walter Daves from Robert Bosch, and Jawad Sardar from the Department of International Trade. So let me start off by setting the scene. I'm going to bring up my presentation. I guess for those of you who don't know who Arcadis are, we are a global design engineering firm for natural and built assets. Our services span from infrastructure to buildings to environment and water, and we are involved in a number of innovative projects, whether that is smart buildings, smart city infrastructure, or electric vehicle charging infrastructure, to name but a few. COVID, of course, for us as well, has had an incredible impact, not only on our business, but also on our services and solutions. And also on our clients, of course. We've had to turn around quite fast in coming up with some very sort of like timely and innovative solutions, such as, for example, building the Nightingale Hospital to sort of like stem that first flow of patients. But our conversation today is all around future cities. So, of course, this will not be a surprise to you at all, but the next decade is forecasted to be the greatest period of urban migration in human history. And this rapid rise in urbanization will dramatically reshape how we live our lives. From climate change to mobility, the impact of population growth, and we really need to rethink many of the ways in which we as citizens interact with our environment. This is the opportunity for our cities to become smarter, more customer-centric, and sustainable. However, 2020 has definitely not been without surprises. With city life coming to a standstill in many parts, rent prices remaining high, young professionals are looking elsewhere to achieve the improved quality of life. The pandemic is likely to accelerate the migration to suburbs in smaller, less dense cities. Big cities like New York, San Francisco, and even London have almost seen an exodus of people moving outside of city centers. Because guess what? If working from home is here to stay, there's no reason for us to be cramped into a little 1 or 2 bedrooms apartments in the city with no outdoor space. We might as well move somewhere where we do have a garden, we do have access to nature per se. Working from home, the new normal. I think for anyone, I'm speaking for everyone here, it has come as no surprise that we have gone through a massive change, not only in behavior, but also in our work and our culture. Work that previously requires a computer and internet connection does not necessarily require people to be in the office 5 times a week. And we've seen that it works. Many such businesses can in fact thrive under lockdown. And some of the global tech giants were really quick to add. We've seen it from Facebook to Twitter to Google, who've all basically declared quite early on in the beginning that they're not expecting their employees to come back this year. And some have even said, look, working from home is here to stay. So if we collectively, and I guess where possibly, sort of adjust our work accordingly, we could even further reduce congestion, air pollution, crowding on public transport, and avoid the spread of the disease on massive transport. This is quite an interesting slide, sort of like I put together, just had a look around the world and how different cities have responded to social distancing and the kind of measures they're looking to employ. So we've seen these sort of like little social distancing circles being drawn across parks and sort of like open area space to encourage people. Yes, they can still go out and enjoy the sunshine, but obviously adhere to social distancing measures. Similar, we've seen some really innovative ways of doing exercises. I think that's from a yoga session where you sort of like all in your little bubble, and again, adhering to social distancing rules. I'm sure you've been out to pubs and restaurants. Quite a bit of a change. Lots of sort of like plexiglass are coming up. Your waiter might not be able to serve you the food directly, but you would probably have to take it from a tray. You would have to leave your contact details for track and tracing, and lots of sort of like different ways of moving in and out of restaurants has obviously massively impacted our normal way. Similarly to some of the kids, obviously going back to school, it's one of my favorite pictures of them basically having little social distancing wings, so to speak, again, just to sort of like teach them in a very, I guess, friendly but also serious manner that social distancing, staying away 1 or 2 meters is really, really important. This is from King's Cross, the area that I personally live around. Again, I thought it quite innovative how they basically placed up little icons and used art, once again, to sort of like encourage people to social distancing while still being outside. And last but not least, these sort of like ground markings are currently popping up all over France, especially in front of schools, to not only encourage the young ones to stay safely apart, but also the adults as well. And it's actually, a couple of studies have actually proven that when you do sort of like stand on the streets and you read this, you do actively take a step back and really sort of like adhere to that. So it's actually really, really great. It's just little things that we can or I guess we have to now integrate into our day-to-day lives. Well, public transport, that's been quite an interesting one. I guess during the height of the pandemic, usage of public transport has really, really fallen up to 90% of some of the world's oldest transit networks, whether that was London, New York, Tokyo, everyone's been affected. And the good news is, though, that authorities can and have chosen from an array of strategies and technologies to bring commuters back to safety, whether that's new spacing guidelines inside the stations or also on the public transport systems themselves, or whether that's having an improved emphasis on hygiene with sort of like having little robots running around, again, more predominant in Asia. As well as using AI and sort of like big data to help advise people on when certain transport modes are really busy and when they're sort of like not busy. So using that technology and asking people, the public, as well as private and public companies to really work together and share that data has been absolutely phenomenal. So what will travel look like for people in the future? Well, clearly there are going to be way more options available, probably with enhanced information on capacity and crowding. So the fact that you now know how busy a bus is going to be, how busy a train is going to be, and advising you whether you wanted to use a different mode of transport to sort of like combat that has been really, really up on the rise. Similarly, cities need to respond to new challenges faster than ever. Given that people's needs vary from city to city, planners and operators will need to respond in different ways. And luckily, we can sort of almost copy-paste some of the things that we're seeing across other cities and seeing whether they are applying to our individual cities. And then, of course, providing mobility options that respond to a changing environment. Access to data to understand people's movement and pattern and preferences is now more important than ever, similar to behavioral insights in technology that can sort of like underpin campaigns and encouraging people to make the best decisions in their circumstances. And then, of course, also a massive increase in on-demand transport services that provide flexibility for customers and operators. We've seen a huge increase in micromobility, the e-scooters, the cycling, but also active travel. Walking has seen a massive rise, and people have had to change their travel pattern to sort of like adjust that quite nicely. So there have definitely been some positives from this global pandemic. Ideally, I guess sort of like, ideally, we will see the rapid innovation that sort of like has been forced upon us as an opportunity for cities to respond to communities' evolving needs and sort of shape the future cities that are sustainable, connective, and inclusive. Thank you very much. And I will now hand over to Frederic, who is going to talk to us more about smart cities.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. So let me set up my presentation here. All right, I guess everybody can see my slides now, and let's start. So, well, actually, during this conference, we will have the chance to know more about incredible mobility projects. But these projects will have to happen in one ecosystem, a smart city. But what is it exactly, and how can we identify it? Ladies and gentlemen, I am Frederic John. I'm a senior consultant at Neckermann Strategic Advisors. We are a think tank consulting firm based in London, and we look at smart city and intelligent mobility trends. So I'm really thrilled to be here with you to explore this question of what is a smart city. And I suggest that we start by visualizing it together. Imagine a city where your health would be monitored. You'd be protected from crime thanks to predictive policing, not like in the Minority Report film, but not far off. You could move in an autonomous vehicle or simply breathe clean air. These are some of the promises that smart cities would enable soon. This video is from the Woven City project led by Toyota, and it's a very interesting one. More formally, this is how we define a smart city at Neckermann Strategic Advisors. A smart city combines its data, its resources, its infrastructure, and its people to continually focus on improving livability. A smart city is an aggregation of power and creativity, but also a body of data and live analysis. And I like this analogy with our human anatomy. In fact, I like to associate this complex smart city ecosystem with our body, like our heart, which is said to be the center of our emotions and the engine of our body. We are this irreplaceable smart element without which there would be no city and mobility at all. I associate mobility with our circular system, like the blood running around in our anatomy. This is the organs or industry that allows the other organs or industries to keep working. Today with COVID-19, one of the biggest social and economic negative impact is our low ability to move because of the virus. So I think this example illustrates quite well how dependent and independent smart city, mobility, and the related industries are. Independent because each organ works on its own, but dependent because without the rest of the body, it is an impossible task. This is exactly the same in a smart city context. Mobility is important, but just a part of it. So here are the other organs or industries. They could be finance, real estate, energy, and so on. So we understand what is this principle of a smart city, but in the reality, what does it mean? How many smart cities exist out there? What's the threshold as of which a city is intelligent or is not? And frankly, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. And this is why I believe that in practice, smart cities are to be defined. There are probably already smart cities out there, but how can we identify them in a fair way? In fact, can it be that binary? Perhaps a smart city should be considered as a gradual notion. And I guess it's a bit like with us humans. Who is smart? Who is not? And for some industries, it is super important to assess our intelligence. This is the case, for example, with universities. And they're using a pitiless and difficult test to measure our intelligence, the GMAT. And I think that the only ones who tried the test before can understand the pain I'm talking about. But maybe you are more familiar with this test, the GCSE. Can we think about a GMAT or a GCSE for cities to grade them and eventually to define the threshold of smartness? Well, in fact, it already exists. There are studies out there that grade cities depending on the topic they investigate. And I found 4 different categories. The first one will be studies looking at the current level of development of a city. Studies looking at the perception of people, the residents, the smart city strategy, and finally, the sustainability. What's important to understand here is that these reports assess equally important aspects of a smart city. Altogether, they form this ecosystem. So I wanted to see how a city such as London would score on these indices. And the overall score of London here, which is the addition of the different ranks, is 60 points. And I could not resist to compare London with other cities. And here's what I found. So actually, I also found with these reports that cities usually pursue at least one of the 4 different objectives that I believe motivate them to be smart. And the first one could be, for example, cities looking at improving their security. And this is the case of Cairo. Cities looking at facing climate change. And I think that this picture should remind ourselves that advanced mobility services and vehicles would be useless in cities impacted by natural disasters such as floods. My point here is that no matter the different objectives that you would pursue, for example, improving the experience of residents such as Singapore, or being a living laboratory like the Woven City that I shared the video earlier, well, no matter which objective that you're looking, there's a need, in my opinion, to have a common understanding about what is a smart city in the reality. I'm not saying that smart cities does not exist out there, but implementing a public Wi-Fi is not enough to qualify as an intelligent urban area. I think that combining qualitative and quantitative data from the reports that I showed you, as per the different objectives that cities are pursuing, could be a very interesting start to explore. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Frederic John. I work for Neckermann Strategic Advisors, and I thank you very much for your attention. I think, Natalie, you're on mute. I'm going to mute myself.
Good, thank you. Thank you so much, Frederic. That was really, really insightful. Next up, we have Jawad. If you wanted to share your slides and unmute yourself.
Sure, 1 second, just sharing slides. Okay, can you guys see that?
It's perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you. Let me just... Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Natalie. Good morning. My name is Jawad Sardar. I am the Future Cities and Prosperity Specialist for the UK's Department for International Trade. I'm a Future City Specialist by trade. I work with technology companies to help them understand use cases for smart city technology, and I help cities understand the utilization of emerging technologies for better public services. For the UK's Department for International Trade, I'm currently the Future Cities and Prosperity Specialist, and I'm overseeing the Prosperity Fund Global Future Cities Programme, which is delivering 30 smart city interventions across 19 cities in 10 key economies across the globe. These interventions explore technology deployment across 3 key pillars, including transport, but also looking at urban planning and resilience. And the projects range over a spectrum of intelligent mobility systems and mobility data hubs in Brazil, to smart city strategies in Turkey, to transit-oriented design in Thailand, and smart ticketing systems in Vietnam. So the global pandemic has exposed the fragility of our urban systems like never before. Across the globe, the pandemic has taken its roots in cities and proven to be the single most disruptive force to the engines of economic growth. The pandemic has very clearly demonstrated that while national and local governments play a crucial role towards a systemic and unified approach to the pandemic, it is the cities and urban systems where the battle is being fought. My presentation will be a hybrid of what Natalie and Frederic have both presented, and so I'll go this quite quickly so we can get to the discussion stage. But I'm very thankful for fellow panelists Frederic for introducing the concept of smart cities and the various definitions and understandings of what a smart city is, because this will help put my presentation into context. Pre-pandemic, cities across the globe were increasingly adopting smart city applications to counter the rising issues emerging from rapid urbanization and climate change that Natalie touched on in her presentation. Smart cities have a pivotal role to play now. The acceleration of digital transformation has now made the adoption of smart cities applications increasingly more important. So smart city service providers are now increasingly helping cities across the globe re-establish themselves as centers of safe social and economic activity. The UK's strong track record in innovation and disruption positions itself as a partner of choice for cities across the globe now looking to re-emerge from the devastating effects of the pandemic. Leading smart city solution providers from the UK are now helping cities tackle key issues emerging from the pandemic, including healthcare, education, and 3 that I will speak briefly about today, which are mobility, governance, and public spaces. So the UK has established itself as a global leader in smart cities. How has it done this? The UK government has played a pivotal role as the funder, coordinator, and regulator of the market. This has allowed the public, private, and academic institutions to concentrate on innovation and disruption. The UK is home to a number of leading smart cities. Frederic and Natalie both made reference to them in their presentations, but I will speak about a few quickly now. London, with its iconic projects such as the Oyster contactless payment system, which is one of the first contactless payment systems in the world, and has developed leaps and bounds now to be a leading multimodal integrated ticketing system, one that is a leader globally. London also is home to the London Data Store, which brings together data from over 33 boroughs in London to a central point where it's then analysed and insights drawn out to then help those 33 boroughs make informed decisions related to healthcare, mobility, and social care. London's also home to the Smart Mobility Living Lab, which is trialling cutting-edge technologies in connected autonomous vehicles. We have Oxford, home to the Oxbotica-led Driven Connected Autonomous Vehicles programme, which is exploring key issues in autonomous and electric vehicles, including fleet management and insurance. And then we have Milton Keynes, which is one of the cities that was part of the largest smart charging projects in the world at the time, Electric Nation, exploring the effects of home charging ports on electricity grids. The strength of the UK smart cities ecosystem, and increasingly the electric and autonomous and connected vehicles ecosystem, lies in its over 200 accelerators, incubators, and demonstrators projects, which are nurturing cutting-edge technology. The UK is increasingly home to some of the world's most renowned R&D centres, including the Alan Turing Institute for AI, the Urban Innovation Lab at the Connected Places Catapult, and the Institute for Future Cities in Glasgow, allowing or providing test beds for technology providers to trial their solutions in very realistic environments, focusing mainly on mobility. And then we have Centre City in Liverpool, contributes to advancements in sensor and IoT technology, which plays a pivotal role in the future of electric vehicles and EV infrastructure. Frederic commented on what makes up smart cities. From the UK side and from the UK government side, we have a defined understanding of what makes up a smart city. And these are these 9 subsectors that you can see on your screen now. The UK specialises in all 9 of these subsectors. We hold specialisms across mobility, governance, data analytics, infrastructure, and energy. And this is driven by our specialisms across all of the key technologies that underpin these smart city subsectors, which includes your baseline ICT infrastructure, so your connectivity, allowing your data to flow freely, geospatial technologies, sensors, IoT, and then artificial intelligence, data analytics, automation, and blockchain. So the future of cities, what are the 3 key pillars that I believe are going to impact cities going forward in a post-pandemic world? Mobility. Both Natalie and Frederic touched upon mobility, but I'm just going to provide a few more comments on this. So with public confidence in mass transport systems, which includes your public transport systems like train, tube, and tram, but also private, the likes of aeroplanes and air travel, and an all-time low at the moment, what does this mean for cities going forward? There's going to now be an urgent problem of having to rethink their mobility solutions. With an expected increase in private vehicles, there will be major concerns around the environment and an increase in carbon emissions once again. And so now there's an urgent need from cities to explore solutions related to electric vehicles and low carbon solutions. And how can they do this? It's about bringing together leading expertise across the mobility sector, the artificial intelligence sector, the governance and regulation sectors, to be able to build a strong ecosystem to be able to trial and test key technologies going forward. Mobility as a solution is another one that's going to be a key trend, both pre-pandemic and now increasingly post-pandemic, providing flexible transport solutions to users, granting them the flexibility of choosing to multiple modes of transport, and be able to have a central point of payment. I have here the City Mapper Pass, which has been trialed in London, which is one of the leading most examples of a private sector-led mobility as a service solution. We're going to see an increase in the introduction of intelligent transport systems to be able to cater for the increased needs on highways. But we're going to have to see the establishment of safe transport hubs, the likes of contactless ticket systems and payment systems across stations and smart stations, which minimize physical engagement and allow for social distancing. Closely related to this is governance. Governance is going to have a major role to play going forward, building upon things that Natalie spoke about and Frederic spoke about. Without strong governance structures, we're not going to be able to develop smart cities that are catered for their citizens. Frederic spoke about tests and about building consistency across cities. We have the British Standards Institute in the UK, which has developed a number of smart city standards and kite marks that allow cities to understand where they are in a global context in terms of their development, how to bring together multiple parts of their city to have standards that look at artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and open data. And we also have, I spoke about Connected Places Catapult. They have a new system called the Cities Typology, which allows cities to compare where they are in their innovation and smart cities journey to cities globally. And governance going forward is going to play a major issue in the establishment of robust electric vehicle infrastructure. Without having robust regulations in place, you're not going to see a natural growth in the adoption of electric vehicles. And finally, the future of spaces, which again brings together the previous two topics I touched upon. Spaces are going to change, and Natalie spoke about this in her presentation. The future of spaces are going to be very different to what we previously knew. So the consideration for social distancing in public spaces, the accessibility to electric vehicle infrastructure. If we want people to adopt lower carbon solutions, so the likes of electric vehicles, we need to make the infrastructure accessible. And that's only going to be possible when we design that infrastructure into our public spaces. But away from autonomous vehicles, away from the automotive industry, sorry, there's going to be an increased adoption of active transport. You know, I've got an example there of Arup, a leading UK or globally known UK design and architecture firm that recently designed over 600 kilometers of active transport routes in Scotland at the moment. And so we're going to have to now redesign both internally as well, incorporating social distancing within closed and confined spaces like your offices and restaurants. And so we're going to see a rapid shift towards incorporation of these sort of protocols within public and private spaces. And we're going to need those technologies that allow us to do so. So the likes of geospatial technologies, like utilizing telecommunications data, utilizing geospatial technologies and satellite imagery, to understand how people can navigate around a public space safely. And so bringing together these three, the mobility, the governance, and future of spaces, I think the three of them are very integrated and can play a key role going forward in the future of smart cities. And only those cities that address all three and in an integrated nature will be successful smart cities going forward, because we're going to see an increasing need now for cities globally to start to address these issues to ensure that they remain active or attractive propositions for people to live, work, and socialize in. Because we're seeing a major shift now from people moving away from cities through to the accessibility of work from home options and digital connections. Cities are no longer the attractive proposition they once were. I will stop there to allow others to jump in now, and hopefully we can have a fruitful discussion going forward. But there is my email address, and if you want to learn about more about the UK offer within smart cities and how the UK government is supporting the establishment of smart cities globally, please do get in touch. I'll be very happy to discuss solutions going forward. And if you are a UK service provider that are looking for international opportunities, please do get in touch. And if you are an international provider looking for opportunities in the UK, again, please do get in touch and we can explore how we can introduce you to the UK ecosystem. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Jawad. And last but not least, Walter. if you just wanted to spend a couple of minutes introducing yourself and where Robert Bosch is with regards to smart cities and what your thoughts are.
Yes, absolutely. I hope you can hear me and see my slides. Okay, should be working now. So yeah, hello everyone, and thanks for the introduction. My name is Walter Davies, and I'm the head of the London Connectory, which is a co-innovation space that we run as Bosch here in central London, together with our partner Nitrous. And the London Connectory is part of a global network of Connectory locations that Bosch is operating in different regions, from Europe to North America, South America, as well as Asia. And the mission of our Connectory innovation centers is to facilitate co-creation between our company and an ecosystem of startups, SMEs, and local bodies. Now, today's session is about smart city. And how does a smart city look like for Bosch? Well, that is represented here in this picture. So for us, a smart city is essentially a place where mobility is multimodal, and where mobility users have the possibility to use different modes of transportation, of course, active transportation modes, but also electric vehicles. In the future, we'll have autonomous vehicles, robo-taxis, and so on, being complementing a certain portfolio of public mass transport type of mobility. And all of these different mobility modes will have to work seamlessly with each other to enable a seamless transition from one mode to another. And obviously, we would all like our cities to be sustainable, and the connectivity between domains such as real estate, mobility, and other domains as well will have to be ensured, so that all the services will be able to work together in a holistic, in a seamless way. And that's where we would like to get to. But of course, that's not where we are right now. Actually, most cities, particularly if we look at the emerging nations in Asia, look more like the picture that we have here in the middle. In the middle, we have huge issues with air pollution, traffic, and sustainability in most cities worldwide. And as we have seen, as introduced by Natalie, the demographic pressure on cities will make these problems actually a lot worse. So there's a lot to be done there. There's a lot to be done in terms of the sustainability of mobility, reducing its CO2 footprint, and there's a lot to be done for sure in terms of improving safety and reducing casualties and accidents. And we believe as Bosch that the way to get there is to establish partnerships and to work together. The future of mobility is not a one company in the game, but is rather relying on a collaboration across the ecosystem of a city. And here in London, we are working together with Transport for London, using their non-competitive partnering framework for co-innovation and for accelerating the speed of development. And I'd like to bring an example of where we are working on that has to do with air quality. We are developing and operating smart solutions for improving the way decisions about air quality measures can be done, and we are doing this by smart sensor solution that allows accurate and precise measurement of pollutants. And we combine this data with data from fleet movement, vehicle movement, and city traffic data. And we are able, together with all these data sources, to create a very precise and accurate modeling of the dispersion, for example, of the air quality across the city, and particularly looking at hotspots and areas that are particularly critical in terms of air quality. We have demonstrated in a number of projects that it is possible to actually take actions to reduce the air pollution in the hot zones in these urban microclimate areas that are particularly affected by air quality problems. And reductions of as much as 20% can actually be achieved by deploying a smart solution that makes use of the data sources that I've mentioned. And we have implemented a project of this kind in the area of Brixton, where we have been working together with TfL and a number of other partners to actually derive strategy to improve the air quality along Brixton High Street. Another project that I would like to mention where we are involved is trying to set a new leading platform for mobility data exchange. So we think that more efficient data exchange across the different domains of mobility is necessary for the city to really become smart. And we have been working together with a number of partners on a project which is called Convex, and that is aiming at becoming the UK's leading mobility data exchange platform. This platform will go live in the early months of 2021 and will be operated for 10 years and beyond. And we are working with a number of partners from the consortium of Convex to bringing use cases live that have to do with V2X communication, for example, so leveraging communication from vehicles to infrastructure and the other way around to reduce safety issues related to accidents. And also we are finding ways to leverage data to improve the infrastructure by, for example, looking at accelerometer data from cars to detect potholes or issues in terms of road infrastructure, and notify in a timely way the infrastructure providers so that measures can be taken. These are just a few examples. We think that the future of mobility will have to be about data sharing and data fusion. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Here there's a link to my LinkedIn profile. I'll be happy to get into discussion with anyone who is interested about the projects that we are doing, and obviously I'm looking forward to the further discussion here in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Walter. Really, really appreciate it. Right, so that's basically us in a nutshell in terms of what are our thoughts around smart cities and some of the projects that we're currently working on, but at the same time also our concerns that we're currently having with some of the implications with that. I think I'm just going to start it off with my first question being back to Frederic. How do you think COVID has impacted cities?
Well, thank you, Natalie, for the question. It's a very interesting one, and I think we could all talk for hours regarding the answer. But I see three different mainstreams. The first one is regarding people. There is a sort of humanization of cities thanks to COVID, in the sense that we've all experienced now cities with less congestion, less pollution, and it's a sort of pleasant feeling. So I think the question now is how can we keep it that way? The second point is regarding infrastructure. Now there is a sort of reversing trend where we take the public space back from traffic to residents. There's a good example, for example, in Barcelona with a Superblocks project. And the last point is regarding the tech. Actually, as it was said during the different presentations right now, there is a sort of acceleration of the development for sustainable technologies, including, of course, technologies that are environmental friendly, but also that will make an impact on social and economic factors.
Thanks very much. Dave, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, from the mobility point of view, one interesting aspect, obviously, that we've observed is the huge growth of active travel modes. I think that's something that, I mean, I myself have been taken up cycling, but I think if we look at the statistics, we say that more than the number of miles that were spent on riding bicycles, for example, increased more than tenfold. And I think this is something that certainly will stay. We see as Bosch a huge growth in our e-bike division, e-bike system division, and we think that definitely that is one of the positive, let's say, outcomes of this. At the same time, though, there are other aspects that are now maybe pushing more and more people towards using a personal car in the city because of safety concerns about using public transport. So at the end of the day, we will have to see how this plays out over the next months, depending on how the situation also develops. It might be that some of the positive aspects in terms of sustainability that were achieved by having a much larger active travel mode portion in the mobility mix, if you want, are compensated a little bit by an upward trend in terms of personal car usage in cities.
It's a very good point, and I'm just going to lead on from that, from the active travel side. And Jawad, I would love to have your input on this one. We know that the UK government has just opened up this massive, I think it was 2 billion sort of like fund for all sorts of mobility related, I guess, sort of like initiatives. But now, especially with COVID, we've seen that we've had a lot more sort of like impromptu pop-up bike lanes are being introduced, similar to, as Dave mentioned, that we're basically giving the streets back to the citizens. We have neighbors sort of like rolling out their chairs, and also restaurants and so forth. How much do you think is here to stay on a permanent basis? And also, how do you think the public will receive that going forward? Because on the one side, we have people who are very happy about, the streets being back opened up. But on the other hand, we also have road users, especially cars, who are definitely not happy at all that all of a sudden they can't go through the city center as they used to.
Oh, 100%. And I think we need to be quite realistic with how this is going to develop, because what we need to understand is active transport is a fantastic solution to a lot of these problems. But a lot of our cities never planned to have active transport as a key mode of transport. A lot of cities, predominantly in the emerging economies, are very car-centric cities. And to then bring in active transport to as a mode of transport on top of those quite poorly planned cities is going to be a difficult task. And so I think we need to be patient in our development and adoption of these sort of active transport plans and going forward. But I definitely think it's here to stay. I think in terms of a user perspective and from citizens of cities, I think there's a definite majority of people who prefer the how things are developing now, with increased usage for pedestrians and cyclists of roads, and that ability to be able to socialize in safe spaces, having cafes and restaurants roll out onto the streets. I think it's really helped small communities thrive, and I think that's going to be key going forward, is ensuring that these communities are given the flexibility to grow within themselves internally, rather than looking at cities as a big ecosystem. I think we need to start looking at them at smaller ecosystems within one large structure. And I think that's when we're going to see a greater adoption of these. But I do think there are going to be some quite large casualties of this. So certain business improvement districts or business districts that were designed with offices as being the center of their offer, and not being very accessible by walking or by cycling, are going to really struggle. And there's lots of areas within London, so within the UK and London, that are going to really struggle to try to adapt their offer to open themselves up to people who no longer want to use public transport and no longer want to use private vehicles. And so going back to my presentation, I think this is going to be a major thing for cities. And those who move fastest on this will be the biggest benefactors, but those who move slowly, I think, are going to struggle quite badly. And this is not just about mobility. I think, again, you need to look at governance, you need to look at urban planning. So if you're not planning, so for cities of the future, if you're not embedding active transport as one of your key transport modes going forward, you're really going to struggle, I think, going forward.
That's a very good shout. Dave, I've got a question for you, because I've mentioned the whole sort of like working from home, and some companies are obviously a lot better equipped than other companies. How is Bosch at the moment dealing with the whole working from home situation, and sort of like what is your message to your employees?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously we we were used to be working with virtual teams across different regions. So in a way, let's say the tools that are being used and the way of working together have not changed much. But obviously, all of a sudden, let's say all employees were kind of forced to go into full-time work from home mode, which was something definitely new. And we've seen this across different locations in Germany, in the UK. The regulations are pretty much the same, and all employees are still actually being recommended to work from home whenever possible. That is not possible for production sites, of course, for engineering kind of work, and we had to develop, let's say, ways around ensuring the safety of employees, and still, let's say, ramping up production operations and keep the business going. That has certainly been a huge challenge, but I would say we are now starting again to go a little bit more back to the office, but still we are very, very far away from, let's say, the pre-lockdown kind of situation. And frankly, it is very likely that we will not get back there, but we will certainly have a larger portion, let's say, a larger amount of time that we will spend working from home. But I personally do not believe that this will be something that we will be doing forever in the same like we are doing now. Because there are, it is actually evident really, and it becomes more and more evident as the time passes, that there are certain key elements of personal interactions that are needed, particularly when working in innovative projects that really require the kind of interaction that is not possible 100% virtually.
Agree, and mental health is such an important issue, and it has been raised by so many people, because yes, you may well have people that are very adept to working from home and are super happy with it, but other people really do not like it at all, and whether that's for personal reasons, whether they have a 2-year-old that all of a sudden they have to take care of as sole care. So it really isn't an ideal situation for some. I guess from that onwards, Frederic, I'm sure you're familiar with the whole 15 minutes city term that Paris has now implemented. Do you think that this type of concept has feet and legs across the world? And do you think that cities should be striving to sort of like almost start developing these kind of 15-minute radiuses?
Well, actually, this project, I really like it. Now, whether or not is it feasible, I'm not sure, but at least Paris has the merit to try it. Actually, it makes me think about what Brussels is doing. So I'm from Brussels, and I think that merging what they did 5 years ago and what Paris is trying to do would be a very great initiative. So what Brussels did 5 years ago was to ban cars from the city center, and so almost overnight, they said, okay, no cars anymore. So at the beginning, people said, wow, it's going to kill all the retails, all the shops. It's going to be a disaster. 5 years later, now, they are celebrating their 5th anniversary, and everybody is super happy. And everybody is super happy because there is a sort of local community. People are now not going to a shopping mall anymore. They are buying their meat at the butcher, their bread at the bakery, and so on and so on. So there is a sort of something that was lost in the center of Brussels reappeared because we banned cars from the city center in the benefit of micromobility, active walking, and etc. So now if you include this idea of having everything around you within 15 minutes, it would make sense in a center where you won't have car. But if you with cars, I'm not sure it's something that is compatible. So these are my thoughts, and I would be very, very much curious to see the outcomes of this project.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else like to comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to jump in just to say that again, the common idea of communities and empowering communities. If you give communities the flexibility and the empowerment to develop their own ecosystems, I think that's going to help you develop these 15-minute centers. And again, it's hugely driven by regulation. So Frederic mentioned Brussels and banning cars. I think London is moving slowly towards it with the likes of the congestion charge and the ULEZ regulations that are making it increasingly difficult for you to take your vehicle into London. I live 20 miles from the centre of London, but I now have to think really hard about how I get to the centre of London. I'm looking for options around me within the 15-20 minute bike walking radius for solutions, and that I think is going to help grow or town centres more than city centres. But I think again it's about empowering the communities, allowing them to build their own infrastructure around active transport, which I think is going to really drive this forward. But I agree with Frederic. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think transit-oriented design, which was an early version of this, I think is going to really be a trend that's going to emerge from the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Really good. So I guess next topic for me would be around net zero carbon cities. And do you think that COVID-19 has, I guess, galvanized and accelerated trends towards achieving net zero by 2050? Dave, you're nodding. Or Frederic?
Well, I just wanted to mention something that perhaps is it's relevant with the impact of COVID-19. The project of the European Commission is now to be carbon neutral, I think, by 2030 instead of 2050. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big statement. Whether or not now they will keep it, I'm not sure. But it is an effect. It is certainly an effect. I had the chance as well last year to visit Copenhagen, to have a tour to understand how they will be carbon neutral by 2025. And it's really impressive, the commitment of everybody, not only the commitment from the private sectors, small shops to big corporates, but also from the public sector and also from the citizens. Everybody is mindful and aware of the impact of their actions and decisions. They will think twice before taking a car just to drive 5 minutes instead of walking 20 minutes or cycling for 5 minutes. And speaking of cycling, there is a recent study published in the Netherlands that showed that thanks to cycling, well, the financial benefits is a plus 3% of their GDP each year. Mm-hmm. So if you combine everything, well, I think we're in a good way to reach that objective, which is very ambitious.
Jawad, do you think the answer to all of this would be an increase in mobility hubs?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's twofold. I think public spaces are going to be a big part of this. I think going forward, green spaces are going to be of huge importance. We have something in the UK called the Greenkeeper tool, which actually was developed by Vivid Economics and the University of Exeter, based down in Exeter, which put a monetary, social and value on green spaces, which I think is a fantastic way of helping developers and city planners understand why they need green spaces within cities, which I think is going to be really key in bringing our carbon emissions down by allowing people accessibility to these sort of things within, again, walking or cycling distances. I think there will be a small shift back to private vehicles, which I think needs to be addressed by cities through their regulations. I think if cities can support the adoption of low carbon technologies through regulations, I think that's going to be a major factor in this going forward. So with mobility, it's all good committing to zero or net zero by 2030. But if you don't have the electric vehicle infrastructure in place to allow people to adopt electric vehicles, you're not really going to help that going forward. And similarly with public transport, if your buses and your trains and trams are still on fossil fuels, are still using high pollutant fuels, it needs to be down in policy. You need to have regulations from the cities pushing this forward. In London we had a scheme to help taxi drivers purchase electric-only taxis, which is just help the adoption of electric vehicles in London. I think these sort of initiatives need to lead the way, and only then will we see realization of these net zero goals. But I do think the pandemic will definitely accelerate it, because I think it's given us a window, or shown us a window of the future of what the future can look like in terms of lower carbon emissions over the 5 or 7 months that most of the world has been in lockdown, and the emissions have dropped incredibly. I think it's a window of opportunity for us now to kind of understand that, look, we can stop this, we can have a positive impact on this, but I think it needs to be led by the policymakers, by the regulators, to ensure that they have the right things in place to allow people to adopt those technologies that are going to reduce carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to add that to me, of course, transport is one of the contributors if you want to see the CO2 footprint of a city, but we have to look at the broader picture, of course, and heating systems, for example, now that the winter is coming, I mean, that is obviously one issue, but also manufacturing operations, for example. And I think that digitalization and IoT can really help improve the efficiency there by improving, for example, the efficiency of manufacturing operations and being able to have predictive maintenance deployed across those production lines, for example, and we also can leverage IoT to heating to improve the efficiency of heating systems in buildings and reduce, let's say, waste, and those applications for me will also be a huge contribution towards achieving the CO2 neutrality of cities.
It almost seems, from what you're just telling us, Walter, it almost seems like smart cities are better equipped for a pandemic than dumb cities, so to speak.
Definitely, because a smart city for me is responsive and it's data driven, and it can understand and adapt a lot more quickly. And I think a response to a pandemic needs to be just that. It needs to be empowered. To empower a city, basically to change along, to adapt its infrastructure to meet the needs of users, obviously of citizens, but also to ensure, for example, that certain policies are implemented with respect to a pandemic management.
That's really good. And then I guess, Frederic, sort of like to bring the session to an end, almost to an end. We talked about smart cities a lot in terms of, the IoT, the ACES, whether it's electric, shared, autonomous, and having all of that data. But it is very, very important, and I think you've highlighted it quite essentially, that it needs to also take into account its citizen and the human aspects of it as well. And a lot of the technology, for technology's sake, is not going to go anywhere if we don't have the public acceptance. And we've already seen that with connected autonomous vehicles. Everyone sort of like is in a very sort of like close cluster of the conferences, the technology involved. But the minute you step outside of that sort of like connected autonomous vehicle cloud and you speak to some of our CAV, they're just, their eyes glaze over and they're like, what do you mean cars that sort of like drive themselves, and how does that work? So having that connection with the citizen and bringing them in, and also continuously involving them in the process is an essential step in any smart city transition. So I think that's quite a key thing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add something on what you said, we did a study about the adoption of autonomous vehicles last year, and actually lots of barriers we are experiencing today is simply due to the fact that there is a lack of education and awareness on the public side about what's the autonomous vehicles, and we are facing similar barriers with electric vehicles and other mobility options because there is a lack of communication and inclusion of the people into the debate, I think.
Thank you, everybody. I just thought I'd sort of absolutely superb session. Really, it was. So thank you all very much indeed. One little part for me is on scooters. Yeah, I personally am seeing where I am sort of quite an upturn on scooters. The biggest problem is they seem to would not want to follow the cycle layouts in terms of what side of the road they should be on, which is really unnerving when you're trying to either walk as a pedestrian or driving to a road junction when you should be looking one way, but the scooters are actually coming from both directions, and then you've got traffic as well. How do we educate people that it's not like I was with a boy, I loved my scooter, all right, it wasn't electric, but I used to go on it everywhere. It didn't matter then, but it matters now. How can we do it?
Jawad, I would love to hear sort of like London's authority voice on that, because that has been a really, really big issue, and we've had accidents happening before, and we have people, as Peter already mentioned, mount a pavement and or driving in 2s or 3s even on that. What is the way going forward?
I think with London, we are slightly behind. So with micro mobility, we are one of the very late adopters in the UK. Only this spring did we start our real exploration of regulations around micro mobility. But I think it's going to be twofold. I think we had this issue with cycling early on, but cycling training and the understanding of cycling regulations and rules were actually embedded in a lot of primary and secondary school. So I myself went through cycling proficiency whilst I was in primary school to learn the rules around using my bicycle on a road and a highway. And I think once we start to allow micromobility, so there's these e-scooters and other things become more widely adopted, I think we need to start introducing these learning exercises and courses for people from as young as primary and secondary school to allow them to understand the right usage of these. But also we need governments to be quite strict on the regulations. I personally don't think that micro scooters should be allowed on pedestrian pathways. I think they should be using the same highways as a cyclist, because the sort of speeds that some of these scooters reach up to, I don't think it's safe to be on a pedestrian walkway. But I think it's going to be, again, regulation led. In the UK, we've still got a consultation open at the moment, looking and seeking knowledge from experts globally who have led adoption of micromobility. And I think it's a space to keep watch on quite closely in the UK to see how that develops. But I think it's going to be twofold. One, regulations, governments need to be quite strict in the enforcement of how they allow scooters to be used. And then two, is going to be an education piece. So bringing people up to speed around the usage of micro scooters and micromobility in general, from as young as primary and secondary school all the way up to offices, and bringing in educations through the private sector, through companies and those sort of initiatives.
Thank you. As we're slightly over, I will thank you all very much indeed. Really superb session, and personally really appreciate you doing it. So thank you, and all keep safe. Take care. Bye.
Thank you
very much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.